Maria Santos stared at the rejection letter in her trembling hands, reading the same cruel words for the fifth time. We regret to inform you that your application for pilot training has been declined. The aviation industry requires individuals who can handle the physical and mental demands of flight operations. The letter felt heavy, heavier than it should have been for just a piece of paper. She sat on the wooden bench outside the recruitment office, watching other candidates walk past her with confident smiles and firm handshakes. Most of them were tall, broad-shouldered men who looked like they belonged in a cockpit. Maria, at barely 5 feet 2 inches tall with a soft voice that often got lost in crowded rooms, felt completely out of place. The recruiting officer had barely looked at her during the interview. He spent most of the time shuffling through papers, occasionally glancing up with an expression that clearly said he was wasting his time. When Maria mentioned her perfect scores in mathematics and physics, he nodded dismissively. When she talked about her childhood dream of flying planes since watching jets soar overhead near her grandmother's farm, he checked his watch. "Miss Santos," he had said finally, "flying commercial aircraft isn't like playing video games or daydreaming. This is serious business that requires serious people. Perhaps you should consider something more suitable for someone with your background." Those words burned in her mind as she walked home through the busy streets of Sao Paulo. People rushed past her, everyone seeming to know exactly where they belonged and what they were meant to do. Maria felt invisible, just another face in the crowd who had been told she wasn't good enough. Her small apartment felt even smaller that evening. The walls were covered with pictures of aircraft she had carefully cut out from magazines over the years. Fighter jets, commercial planes, vintage aircraft from World War II. Each image represented a dream that now seemed foolish and unrealistic. Maria's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How did the interview go, Mija?" She stared at the message for several minutes before typing back, still waiting to hear back. She couldn't bear to tell her family about another rejection. This was the 7th aviation company that had turned her down in 3 months. Her neighbor Carlos knocked on the door around 8 o'clock, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing his mechanic's uniform. He worked at a small airfield outside the city, fixing engines and maintaining aircraft for private owners and flight schools. "You look like someone stole your favorite airplane," he said, settling into the chair across from her tiny kitchen table. Carlos had become like an older brother to Maria since she moved to the city for college. He understood her passion for aviation better than anyone. "They said no again," Maria replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "The man basically told me I should find something more suitable for my background. I think he meant suitable for someone like me." Carlos frowned, his weathered hands wrapped around his coffee cup. "Maria, I've been working with aircraft for 15 years. I've seen plenty of pilots come and go. Some of the best ones weren't the biggest or the loudest. They were the ones who truly understood what flying meant. But maybe they're right," Maria said quietly. "Maybe I'm just fooling myself. Maybe some dreams aren't meant for some people." "Listen to me carefully," Carlos said, leaning forward. "Tomorrow morning, I want you to come with me to the airfield. There's someone I think you should meet. His name is Captain Rodriguez, and he runs a small flight training school. He's different from those corporate recruiters." Maria wanted to protest, to say she had heard enough rejections for one lifetime. But something in Carlos's voice made her pause. He had never steered her wrong before, and he seemed genuinely excited about this opportunity. "What makes him different?" she asked. "He cares more about what's in here," Carlos tapped his chest, "than what's written on some application form. He's trained pilots who went on to fly for major airlines, helicopter rescue teams, even cargo planes that deliver supplies to remote areas. He looks for passion and skill, not just what someone looks like." That night, Maria lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of aircraft taking off in the international airport. Each engine's roar reminded her of the dream that refused to die, no matter how many times it was crushed. She thought about her grandmother, who had always told her that the strongest steel was forged in the hottest fire. As dawn broke through her small window, Maria made a decision. She would give her dream one more chance. If Captain Rodriguez rejected her too, then maybe it was time to accept that some dreams were meant to stay dreams. But until then, she refused to give up on the little girl who used to stand in wheat fields, watching planes paint silver lines across the endless blue sky. She dressed carefully in her best interview clothes and gathered her certificates and transcripts. Her hand still shook slightly, but this time it felt different. This time, it felt like the trembling before something important was about to begin. The small airfield sat 30 miles outside Sao Paulo, surrounded by green hills and open sky. Maria felt her heart racing as Carlos drove his old pickup truck through the gate marked Rodriguez Aviation Academy. 3 small aircraft sat parked on the tarmac, their propellers still and wings gleaming in the morning sun. Captain Rodriguez emerged from a hangar wearing oil-stained coveralls and a warm smile. He was a compact man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Unlike the corporate recruiters, he looked directly at Maria when Carlos introduced them, studying her face with genuine interest. "So you want to fly?" he said simply. "Tell me why." Maria had prepared speeches about career opportunities and professional goals, but something about Captain Rodriguez's direct approach made her forget all the rehearsed words. Instead, she found herself talking about her grandmother's farm, about lying in tall grass watching planes overhead and feeling like they were calling to her. "When I see an aircraft," she said, "I don't just see a machine. I see freedom. I see the chance to connect places and people, to be part of something bigger than myself. I wanted this since I was 6 years old, and I've never wanted anything else." Captain Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Carlos tells me you've been rejected by several companies. What do they tell you? That I don't fit the image of a pilot. That I'm too small, too quiet, not the right type of person for this industry." "The right type of person," Captain Rodriguez repeated, shaking his head. "Come with me. I want to show you something." He led them into his office, where the walls were covered with photographs of former students. Maria saw pilots of every size, age, and background. Women flying cargo planes over mountains, young men operating helicopter ambulances, older pilots teaching new students. Each photo was signed with personal messages thanking Captain Rodriguez for believing in them. "Maria Elena Vasquez," he said, pointing to a photo of a petite woman standing beside a large commercial airliner. "Shorter than you are. Now she's a captain for one of Brazil's largest airlines. This is Roberto Chun, who was told his accent was too thick. He flies international routes and speaks 4 languages to passengers from around the world." Maria stared at the photos, feeling something stirring inside her chest that had been quiet for too long. "The aviation industry has old ideas about what pilots should look like," Captain Rodriguez continued. "But the sky doesn't care about any of that. Aircraft respond to skill, knowledge, and judgment. They respond to pilots who respect them and understand them. Everything else is just noise." He pulled out a thick manual and set it on the desk. "Flight training is expensive and time-consuming. Most of my students take 2 years to complete their commercial pilot certification. But I have a program for exceptional students who show real promise. If you're willing to work harder than you've ever worked before, I can offer you a scholarship that covers half the training costs." Maria felt tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "What would I need to do?" "First, you take our aptitude test. Written examination covering mathematics, physics, meteorology, and navigation principles. Then, you do a simulator evaluation to test your spatial awareness and hand-eye coordination. If you pass both, we start with ground school 3 days a week while you continue working to pay for living expenses." Carlos grinned and nudged Maria's shoulder. "I told you he was different. But I should warn you," Captain Rodriguez added, his expression becoming serious. "This won't be easy. Some of my students wash out because they think wanting something badly enough is the same as being willing to sacrifice for it. You'll study until your eyes burn. You'll practice emergency procedures until you can respond correctly while half asleep. You'll face moments when you question whether you're smart enough, brave enough, good enough." Maria thought about all the rejection letters, all the dismissive interviews, all the nights she had wondered if her dream was just foolish stubbornness. "When can I take the test?" she asked. Captain Rodriguez smiled. Right now, if you want. But take a moment to think about it. This is a commitment, not just an opportunity. Once we start, I expect you to see it through no matter how difficult it becomes. Maria walked outside to the tarmac, where the 3 training aircraft sat waiting. She approached the nearest one, a single-engine Cessna with worn paint and countless hours of flight time etched into its aluminum skin. She placed her hand on the wing, feeling the cool metal that had carried so many dreams into the sky. Behind her, she could hear Captain Rodriguez and Carlos talking quietly. They were giving her space to make her decision, but she had already made it the moment she saw those photographs on his wall. She turned back toward the office, her shoulders straight and her voice clear. I'm ready for the test. For the next 4 hours, Maria worked through the most challenging examination she had ever encountered. Mathematics problems that required her to calculate fuel consumption rates and weight distribution. Physics questions about lift and thrust and drag. Weather pattern analysis that would determine whether a flight could proceed safely. When she handed in her test, Captain Rodriguez reviewed it immediately while she and Carlos waited nervously outside. The sun had moved across the sky, and other students were arriving for afternoon flight lessons. Maria watched them with a mixture of envy and hope. Finally, Captain Rodriguez called her back inside. His expression was unreadable as he set her test paper on the desk. 94%, he said. The highest score I've seen in 3 years. Maria felt the world tilt slightly. Does that mean? It means we move to the simulator evaluation. But, Maria, I want you to understand something. That test score tells me you have a knowledge foundation to be a pilot. The simulator will tell me if you have the instincts. Both are necessary, but neither one alone is sufficient. As they walked toward the flight simulator room, Maria realized this was the first time in months that she felt truly hopeful. Not the desperate hope that comes from having no other options, but the steady confidence that comes from knowing you belong exactly where you are. 18 months later, Maria stood in front of a bathroom mirror at Rodriguez Aviation Academy, adjusting her crisp white shirt and dark blue tie. Today was her final check ride, the last examination standing between her and her commercial pilot license. Her hands were steady as she pinned her hair back, but her reflection showed the intensity burning in her dark eyes. The journey had been exactly as difficult as Captain Rodriguez had warned. There were nights when she studied flight manuals until 3 in the morning, then woke up at 6 to work her part-time job at the airport cafeteria. There were weekends when other students went home to their families, and she stayed at the academy practicing instrument approaches in the simulator until her eyes felt like sandpaper. The hardest part hadn't been the technical challenges. Maria had mastered navigation calculations, weather interpretation, and aircraft systems faster than most students. The hardest part had been the doubt that crept in during her lowest moments. When she failed her first cross-country navigation flight because of a calculation error, she spent an entire night wondering if the corporate recruiters had been right about her. But Captain Rodriguez had become more than just an instructor. He had become a mentor who saw potential even when Maria couldn't see it herself. When she struggled with radio communications because her soft voice sometimes got lost in air traffic control chatter, he worked with her for hours to develop confidence and clarity. When she felt overwhelmed by the complexity of instrument flight rules, he broke them down into manageable pieces until they became second nature. Maria, Captain Rodriguez had told her one particularly difficult afternoon, "I've been teaching for 25 years. I can usually tell within a few weeks which students have what it takes to be professional pilots. You don't just have what it takes. You have something special. You understand aircraft in a way that can't be taught." Now, walking toward the hangar where her check ride would begin, Maria carried those words with her. She had logged over 200 flight hours, passed every written examination, and earned the respect of her fellow students. 3 of them had already been hired by regional airlines. 2 others were training to become flight instructors themselves. The designated pilot examiner waiting beside the aircraft was someone Maria had never met before. Captain Williams was a stern-looking woman in her 50s who had flown for major airlines before becoming a federal aviation examiner. Her reputation for thorough and demanding check rides was legendary among aviation students throughout the region. "Miss Santos," Captain Williams said, shaking hands with a firm grip, "I've reviewed your training records, impressive academics, and flight performance. Today we'll see how you handle real-world situations under pressure." For the next hour, they conducted the oral examination portion of the test. Captain Williams asked detailed questions about aircraft systems, emergency procedures, weather minimums, and federal aviation regulations. Maria answered each question clearly and completely, drawing from months of intensive study and practical experience. "Now let's see how you fly," Captain Williams said, gathering her paperwork. The aircraft for today's test was a twin-engine Piper Seneca, more complex than anything Maria had flown during her training. As she conducted her pre-flight inspection, she felt the familiar calm that settled over her whenever she was around aircraft. Her hands moved methodically over control surfaces, checking for damage or wear. She tested fuel levels, examined propellers, and verified that all safety equipment was properly stowed. Captain Williams observed everything without comment, making notes on her clipboard. When they climbed into the cockpit, Maria ran through her pre-flight checklist with practiced precision. Each switch, gauge, and control received her attention in the proper sequence. "Where are we flying today?" Maria asked as she started the engines. "We'll begin with normal takeoff and departure procedures. Then I'll ask you to demonstrate various maneuvers and emergency scenarios. At some point during our flight, I'm going to simulate equipment failures or weather problems. Your job is to respond appropriately and safely." As they taxied toward the runway, Maria felt the same excitement she had experienced during her first solo flight 8 months earlier. The difference now was confidence born from experience and training. She knew this aircraft, understood its capabilities and limitations, and trusted her ability to handle whatever challenges the examination might bring. "Tower, Seneca 87 Alpha ready for departure," she radioed, her voice clear and professional. "Seneca 87 Alpha, cleared for takeoff runway 09, wind 080 at 12 knots. Maria advanced the throttles smoothly, feeling the aircraft gather speed down the runway. At rotation speed, she eased back on the controls, and the Seneca lifted gracefully into the morning sky. Below them, the airfield grew smaller, surrounded by the green hills where she had first dreamed of becoming a pilot. "Very nice takeoff," Captain Williams noted. "Now let's see how you handle single-engine operations." Without warning, she pulled back the power on the left engine, simulating a complete failure. The aircraft immediately began to yaw and lose altitude. This was the moment every pilot dreaded, but one that every commercial pilot had to master. Maria's response was immediate and correct. She applied pressure to the rudder pedal to counteract the yaw, adjusted power on the remaining engine, and configured the aircraft for best single-engine performance. Within seconds, she had the Seneca flying straight and level again. "Where's the nearest suitable airport?" Captain Williams asked. Maria was already ahead of her. "Santos Regional is 12 miles southeast of our position. Runway 8,000 feet, approach lighting, full emergency services available." As she navigated toward the alternate airport, maintaining precise control of the aircraft despite the simulated emergency, Maria realized something important had happened. She was no longer thinking about whether she belonged in this cockpit. She was simply doing what she had trained to do, responding to challenges with the skills and knowledge she had worked so hard to develop. The rest of the check ride continued for another hour. Captain Williams tested Maria's ability to fly precise instrument approaches, navigate using radio aids, and handle multiple emergency scenarios. Each challenge was met with calm, professional responses that demonstrated both technical competency and good judgment. When they finally landed back at Rodriguez Aviation Academy, Captain Williams was quiet for several minutes as she completed her paperwork. Maria waited nervously, knowing that her entire future depended on what happened next. 2 years after earning her commercial pilot license, Maria found herself working for Transcargo Airlines, flying twin-engine aircraft that delivered packages and supplies throughout South America. It wasn't the glamorous airline career she had once imagined, but it was real flying with real responsibilities, and she loved every challenging minute of it. Her route today was particularly demanding. Sao Paulo to Lima, Peru, carrying medical supplies for a children's hospital. The weather forecast showed thunderstorms developing along the usual flight path, which meant careful navigation around dangerous storm cells while maintaining an on-time arrival. Captain Roberto Silva, her flying partner for this trip, was a veteran pilot with over 15,000 flight hours. When Maria first started flying for Transcargo, some of the older pilots had been skeptical about working with someone so young and inexperienced. But Maria's careful attention to detail and calm handling of difficult situations had quickly earned their respect. "Weather's looking ugly between here and Lima," Roberto said, studying the latest meteorological reports. "We might need to request an alternate route that adds 30 minutes to our flight time." Maria examined the weather radar displays, noting the intense red and yellow areas that indicated severe thunderstorm activity. "If we depart 15 minutes early and take the coastal route, we can probably stay clear of the worst cells and still make our scheduled arrival time." "Good thinking. Let's file for the coastal route and see if air traffic control approves." As they completed their pre-flight preparations, Maria felt the familiar satisfaction of solving complex problems with knowledge and experience. Every flight presented new challenges that required quick thinking and careful decision-making. Weather, mechanical issues, air traffic delays, airport closures, commercial aviation demanded pilots who could adapt and respond professionally to constantly changing conditions. Their aircraft today was a turboprop cargo plane capable of carrying 8,000 pounds of freight. The medical supplies they were transporting included emergency antibiotics, surgical equipment, and blood products that couldn't be delayed. Maria understood that her flying skills directly impacted people's lives, which made every detail of the flight important. 2 hours into their journey, flying at 22,000 feet over the Pacific coastline, Maria noticed something unusual on her engine instruments. The right engine was running slightly hotter than normal, and the oil pressure was gradually decreasing. "Roberto, take a look at engine number 2. Oil pressure is dropping, and cylinder head temperature is climbing." Roberto immediately focused on the engine displays, his expression becoming serious. As they watched, the oil pressure continued to fall while the temperature rose toward dangerous levels. "We need to shut down that engine before it seizes," Roberto said. "I'll handle the radio calls while you run the emergency checklist." Maria's hands moved efficiently through the emergency shutdown procedures she had practiced countless times in simulators. Fuel cutoff, mixture to idle cutoff, propeller to feather, alternator, and boost pump switches to off. The right engine wound down to silence, leaving them flying on a single engine over remote ocean waters. "Mayday, mayday, mayday." Transcargo Flight 478 declaring an emergency. Single engine failure, requesting immediate clearance to nearest suitable airport. The air traffic controller's voice came back immediately. "Transcargo 478, understand single engine emergency. Nearest airport is Trujillo, Peru, bearing 090, distance 60 miles. Emergency services are being notified." Flying on one engine was challenging, but manageable in their aircraft type. Maria trimmed the controls to compensate for the asymmetric thrust, while Roberto calculated their fuel requirements and descent profile. They would have enough fuel to reach Trujillo with adequate reserves, but there was no margin for error. "Maria," Roberto said quietly, "I want you to know that you're handling this exactly right. Smooth, calm, by the book. That's what we need right now." As they began their descent toward Trujillo, Maria felt the same focused concentration she remembered from her Czech ride 2 years earlier. Emergency situations demanded clear thinking and precise execution. Every action had to be deliberate and correct because there were no opportunities to try again. The approach to Trujillo required flying over mountainous terrain in gusty wind conditions. With only one engine providing power, their performance margins were significantly reduced. Maria had to carefully manage their airspeed and descent rate to ensure they could reach the runway safely. Transcargo 478, you're cleared for the visual approach runway 07. Wind 090 at 18 knots, gust to 28. Emergency equipment is standing by. Cleared visual approach runway 07, Transcargo 478. During the final approach, with fire trucks and ambulances positioned alongside the runway, Maria demonstrated the skills that had carried her through 18 months of intensive training. She compensated for the gusty crosswind conditions while maintaining precise control of their single-engine approach speed. The aircraft touched down smoothly on the center line, and she brought it to a stop well before the end of the runway. Outstanding job, Roberto said as they shut down the remaining engine. Textbook emergency handling from start to finish. Emergency personnel surrounded their aircraft within minutes, but inspection revealed that the engine failure had been contained without any fire or structural damage. The medical supplies were quickly transferred to a local ambulance for delivery to the Children's Hospital in Lima. Later that evening, as they waited for a replacement aircraft to continue their interrupted journey, Roberto made a phone call to their chief pilot. Maria could hear his side of the conversation from across the crew lounge. "Chief, you should know what happened today. We had a serious engine failure over open ocean, and Maria Santos handled it perfectly. Cool, professional, exactly what you want in an emergency situation. She's ready for bigger responsibilities." Maria stared out the window at the lights of Trujillo, thinking about how far she had traveled from that wooden bench outside the recruitment office where she had read her first rejection letter. Every challenge she had faced, the dismissive recruiters, the difficult training, the long hours studying while working to pay her expenses, had prepared her for moments like today. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Captain Rodriguez. "Heard about your emergency landing today. Proud of you, pilot. That's exactly why I knew you belonged in a cockpit." Tomorrow they would fly a replacement aircraft to Lima, deliver the medical supplies, and return home to Sao Paulo. It would be another routine day in a career that was still building towards something larger. But tonight, Maria understood that she had passed an important test, one that proved she belonged among the professional pilots who kept the world connected through their skill and dedication. 5 years after her emergency landing in Trujillo, Captain Maria Santos found herself sitting in the left seat of an Airbus A320, wearing the 4 stripes of an airline captain on her shoulders. She had achieved what once seemed impossible, a position as a commercial airline pilot flying passengers throughout Latin America for Meridian Airlines. The promotion to captain had come after 3 years as a first officer, during which Maria had built a reputation for exceptional skill and judgment. Her colleagues respected her thorough preparation, calm demeanor under pressure, and ability to mentor younger pilots joining the airline. Today's flight would be different from her usual domestic routes. Meridian 447 was scheduled to fly from Sao Paulo to Miami with 168 passengers and 6 crew members. It was Maria's first international flight as captain, representing both a professional milestone and a significant responsibility. First Officer David Chun, our experienced pilot recently hired from another airline, completed the pre-flight briefing with characteristic attention to detail. Weather looks good for most of the route, but there's a line of thunderstorms developing near the Caribbean that we'll need to monitor. Fuel load gives us plenty of reserves if we need to deviate around weather. As passengers boarded the aircraft, Maria felt the familiar sense of responsibility that came with commanding a commercial flight. Every person walking down the aisle was trusting her with their safety, their schedule, their connection to family or business obligations. It was a trust she had never taken lightly since her first day of flight training. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Meridian Flight 447 with service to Miami. Our flight time today will be approximately 4 hours and 30 minutes. We're expecting smooth conditions for most of our journey, with possible minor turbulence as we approach the Florida coast. Flight attendants, please prepare for departure. The takeoff from Sao Paulo International was routine, climbing through scattered clouds into clear skies above the Brazilian coastline. As they reached their cruising altitude of 37,000 feet, Maria settled into the rhythm of long-distance flying. Monitoring systems, communicating with air traffic control, and staying alert for any changes in weather or aircraft performance. 3 hours into the flight, while crossing over the Amazon basin, their routine journey suddenly became anything but ordinary. "Captain," David said, his voice tense but controlled, "I'm seeing some unusual readings on the hydraulic system displays. Primary hydraulic pressure is fluctuating, and we've lost some functionality in the flight control systems." Maria immediately focused on the system displays, recognizing the signs of a serious mechanical problem. Without full hydraulic power, their ability to control the aircraft's flight surfaces would be severely compromised. It was the kind of emergency that airline pilots train for extensively, but hope never to encounter with passengers on board. "Run the hydraulic system failure checklist," she instructed David. "I'll inform air traffic control that we may need priority handling." As David worked through the emergency procedures, Maria assessed their options. They were currently over remote jungle terrain with no suitable airports within easy range. The nearest major airport capable of handling their aircraft type was Bogotá, Colombia, still more than an hour away. Bogotá Center, Meridian 447, declaring an emergency. "We have a hydraulic system failure and are requesting priority clearance to Bogotá International Airport." Meridian 447, understand you are declaring an emergency. You are cleared direct to Bogotá, descend, and maintain flight level 240. Emergency services will be standing by. The next 45 minutes tested every skill Maria had developed throughout her aviation career. Flying an aircraft with degraded flight controls required constant attention and precise inputs. The normal response to control movements was sluggish and unpredictable, making even small course corrections challenging. "How are we doing back there?" she asked the senior flight attendant through the intercom. "Passengers are nervous, but following instructions. We've prepared the cabin for possible emergency landing procedures." Maria made the decision to address the passengers directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain with an update on our flight status. We're experiencing a technical issue that requires us to land in Bogotá instead of continuing to Miami. This is a precautionary measure, and I want to assure you that we are following established procedures to ensure everyone's safety. Please remain seated with your seatbelts securely fastened and follow any instructions from our flight attendants." As they approached Bogotá, flying at reduced speed with limited control authority, Maria could see emergency vehicles positioned alongside the runway. Fire trucks, ambulances, and airport rescue equipment were ready to respond if the landing didn't go according to plan. Bogotá Tower, Meridian 447 on final approach runway 13 left. "We'll need emergency equipment to follow us to the gate after landing to inspect for possible fluid leaks." The approach required Maria to fly manually, without the assistance of the automated flight systems that normally would help stabilize the aircraft during landing. She had to compensate for the degraded hydraulic systems while managing a descent path that would bring them safely to the runway. David called out airspeed and altitude information while monitoring their remaining hydraulic pressure. 1,000 feet, speed 145 knots, sink rate 700 feet per minute. "Looking good, Captain." With reduced control effectiveness, Maria had to make larger control inputs than normal to maintain their approach path. The aircraft felt heavy and unresponsive, requiring constant attention to keep it lined up with the runway centerline. 500 feet, speed 140, sink rate 600. "You're doing great." At 50 feet above the runway, Maria gradually reduced power and raised the nose slightly for touchdown. The aircraft settled onto the pavement with a firm but controlled landing, and she immediately applied maximum braking while keeping the aircraft straight down the runway centerline. "Excellent landing," David said as they slowed to taxi speed. "Smooth as silk considering what we were dealing with." Emergency vehicles followed them to the gate, where mechanics immediately began inspecting the aircraft for the source of the hydraulic failure. Passengers deplaned normally, many stopping to thank Maria and David for their professional handling of the emergency. Later that evening, while waiting for a replacement aircraft to complete their journey to Miami, Maria received a phone call that would change her perspective on everything that had happened in her career. "Captain Santos, this is Chief Pilot Martinez from Meridian Airlines headquarters. I wanted to personally commend you on your handling of today's emergency. Your professionalism and skill prevented what could have been a catastrophic situation." "Thank you, sir. My first officer and the entire crew performed exceptionally well." "Maria, there's something else I need to tell you. We've received a request from the International Pilots Association to feature your story in their upcoming safety publication. Your journey from being rejected by multiple airlines to successfully handling a major emergency as a captain represents exactly the kind of determination and skill we need in commercial aviation." As Maria stood in the Bogota airport that night, watching technicians work on their aircraft under bright floodlights, she thought about the long path that had brought her to this moment. Every rejection letter, every hour of study, every difficult training flight had contributed to her ability to safely bring 168 people through an emergency that could have ended very differently. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her mother. "Saw the news about your emergency landing. So proud of my pilot daughter. Grandma would have been amazed to see how far you've flown." The next morning, as they continued their journey to Miami in a replacement aircraft, several passengers approached Maria to express their gratitude. An elderly man shook her hand and said, "Young lady, you saved all our lives yesterday. Thank you for being exactly the kind of pilot we needed when things went wrong." Maria realized that her childhood dream of flying had evolved into something much more significant than she had ever imagined. She wasn't just a pilot who had overcome rejection and discrimination. She had become someone who could be counted on when people's lives hung in the balance, someone who proved that determination and skill mattered more than fitting other people's expectations of what a pilot should look like. As the aircraft climbed toward cruising altitude on their final leg to Miami, Maria understood that her journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more opportunities to prove herself, more chances to demonstrate that the sky truly belonged to anyone with the skill and dedication to claim it. But now she faced those challenges with the confidence that comes from knowing exactly where she belonged. In the captain's seat, keeping people safe and dreams alive, 37,000 feet above a world that had once told her she didn't have what it takes to fly.